First of all, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I am Deb Barker. I'm the Executive Director of the Connecticut Westchester Hudson Valley chapter of the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. I know that's a mouthful. We are super excited to have this panel and to be the host for the event this evening. An incredible group of women who are going to be sharing some information with you tonight. I hope you enjoy it. We're very pleased to be doing this because technology is something that is so integral to our mission and what we do at LLS, and the ability to move that research forward, that's a key piece of that. So we're very, very excited to be the hosts. And also, it happens that we have a lot of really great women who work at our organization. Dr. Gwen is one. Our executive leadership team, there are 9 on the executive leadership team, 5 of them are women. And women leadership in the chapters is very prominent, as well as staff. So we are very excited. And from a volunteer perspective, a lot of women in the room, you know, a lot of the women and what they do in the volunteer space is huge. So we're very pleased with that piece as well. We hope you enjoy this evening. We're here to answer any questions, and if you have any, would like any more information about LLS, we'll be available to do that. But thank you very much for coming.
Deb, thank you so much. And I'm going to introduce my co-founder, Grace, to kind of kick us off.
Wonderful. Thank you, Susanna. Good evening, everyone. I'm Grace Fidelli, co-founder of Women Innovation, along with Susanna Keith. I'd like to welcome you to our 4th panel. Susanna and I have had Women in Innovation for roughly a year now. And we'd like to thank the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society for hosting us this evening. So WIN is a community-focused organization dedicated to elevating women in Westchester County, New York, and Fairfield County, Connecticut, who are pushing the boundaries of innovation and accelerating the pace of change across industries. As co-founders, our hope is to empower and educate women with the latest innovation and technology trends. So today we have the opportunity to have a conversation with some incredible women in STEM, and Suzanne and I will moderate this evening.
Great. So Grace, I'm going to stand up for a second. So just to kind of give a quick preamble and introductions, we're just so honored to moderate, and the fact that, and to welcome all of you. As you know, our group is all about trying to get more people in the C-suite, figure out a way to really support and help each other. And I think, like Grace said, over this year, the fact that we have 400 women signed up on our meetup is pretty incredible. Our apologies that people had a difficult time with the meetup today. But I know some people were trying to sign up, but technology sometimes doesn't move as quickly as we hope, but hopefully it will going forward. So what I would like to do is first introduce our panel, and we have an incredible group of panelists. Again, our focus tonight is on science and technology, and while some women don't directly have a career in science and technology, they all have careers that impact science and technology. And I also hope that tonight you will get on your social media and you will tweet, and you will Facebook, and you'll hashtag, and we actually have a sample tweet in the back that we can pull up front maybe and show you. So if you're social media people, we really appreciate your support. So first of all, we have Ariane, and she is the co-founder of Inspire Shift, a boutique leadership consulting firm. She does executive and career coaching and organization consulting in quite phenomenal number of Fortune 500 companies. She serves on the advisory committee for the Stanford University Clayman Institute for Gender Research and its Center for the Advancement of Women's Leadership. So she's really on the forefront of what's happening with gender equality, pay, etc. So we're very honored to have her. Thank you. Next, we are so excited to have Heather Cabot, who is co-author of Geek Girl Rising. You can find this wonderful book at Arcade and Rye or anywhere. And the other part of it is Geek Girl Rising, and then the second part, I love it, which is the inside the sisterhood, shaking up tech. That's a good one. And she's also an adjunct professor of Columbia Journalism School, a former newscaster,
yes,
and she's an angel investor. So, and also a mom, and she's just, her story is phenomenal. We all heard about what happened in San Francisco with a number of the venture capitalists. The women that were senior partners. Heather gets down and talks about it. Mm-hmm. So it's excellent. We probably may not get into that detail today, but you should read her book.
Thank you.
And then we have Cheryl Iron, who's creator of the Area Method, and she's author of the book Problem Solved, About Decision Making. She also is the founder of CSE Consulting, and she is also an adjunct professor at Columbia Business School. Now, I don't know what happened, because I went to NYU Business School, but my grandfather used to teach it, so it's okay. But anyway, it's great to have Cheryl here, and what an honor. You definitely, she has her books at the back, at the end, if you'd like to purchase them. And there's is it the intro or the foreword? It's written by Tony Blair. It's a wow, it's amazing. And I think her methodology is something that can help you from helping your child decide where to go to college to great decision making on the job. And then we have Gwen Nichols, and Gwen is our Chief Medical Officer here at LLS, and we're so honored to have her. And again, like Deb said, I mean, it's so great to be part of a company where so many senior women are, at the top of the letterhead, which is really, really great. And then we have Lucy, who is a financier of media and entertainment, and I'm sure she has a lot of good scuttlebutt to tell us, especially with what's going on in Hollywood lately. So, what we will do is we'll start with our first question, which I think is really an interesting one that some of you might have caught, we might not, and I think what's super cool is that our audience tonight is filled with men and women, and current executives and future executives, and so I think it's something that we have to make sure to lift up and empower everyone. And one of the key issues that we still see is what's happening with the gender gap. And there was Equal Pay Day, which has now been around for like 2 years, right? So McKinsey had first come out with a study on equal pay, like was that 1.5 years ago? And now they came out with another one on gender gap issues. How can we get more women in the C-suite? How can we get pay more equal? What's position? And even now, I think there's a dialogue in our country, like what's the appropriate treatment? So I'm going to let Ariane kick off a question today. Do you think there is still a gender gap, and what's your thought process?
Yeah. So thank you, Susanna, and thank you to all the other panelists and to the audience. Really excited to be here because I think we're addressing a really important issue. And I'm excited to see that the Leukemia Society has such a wonderful percentage of people in their senior leadership, and that is completely out of the norm. So really phenomenal. You're definitely a forerunner in this. So when we look at gender gap, we have about 50% men and women enter in companies, and then when we look at the C-suite, that percentage completely changes. So we have 79% men in the C-suite and 21% women in the C-suite. And what we see that at every level of promotion, the proportion of men increases and the proportion of women decreases. So do we have a gender gap? I would say yes, we do. And I think why is it then so difficult? At Stanford University, we speak about, the gender revolution has kind of stalled, and why is it so difficult? And I think there's probably 4 dynamics at play that I will take you through very quickly. One is that there is a lot of unconscious bias. And so because it's unconscious, it's much harder to tackle. And even in this latest research from McKinsey and Lean In, they were speaking about in a company where only 1 out of 10 women are in senior leadership, 50% of the men interviewed feel that women are equally represented, or well represented, I should say. What is also surprising, 30% of the women agree with that statistic. So if we speak about unconscious bias, that kind of communicates that people are actually not aware that there is still really a big gender gap, and they may not even be aware of how that gender gap exists or where it came from. The other aspect, so that's a really important dynamic. I think what is also really important is that a lot of people see this as a women's issue, and it is actually a leadership issue. And if the leadership can get behind this, we would all be so much better off, because there's a lot of research done on the fact that diversity is actually really important for companies and actually leads to better results and better decision making. So I think when we look at this, that kind of frames the issue. Then there's actually 3 items that we want to look at. One is the company level. We need to do a lot more training and make people aware of how they can overcome unconscious bias. And we want to actually help managers to be more aware of this as well, because at that middle level, there's a lot of changes in behavior that can actually help increase. Women get more stretch assignments. Women, we need to look at the criteria with which we evaluate men and women. They tend to be more biased to favor men. So there's a lot of issues that happen at the company level that are taking place in the company, but also, aspects like parental leave. All these elements are very important to overcome gender bias. Second part is that women really want to understand how to navigate the workforce, and that will help more women. Can they want to know that they want to ask for that increase in raise. There's a lot of aspects that women can do to help overcome that gender bias as well. And the last thing I will say is the whole societal, cultural issue. We're still raising our girls differently than our boys. When a boy shows up as a leader, we say, wow, what a great, he's a leader, he's in charge. When a girl tends to do that, we call her the B word, which is bossy, which later on then turns into sometimes another B word. I won't have to go into that. But so I think it's really important that we are looking at how we're raising our kids. I just did a presentation for CAN, and it was about women in the creative world. We talked a lot about confidence, and one of the things we spoke about as well, how actually the whole advertising and creative world can help, mitigate this issue by how we're portraying women in advertising. I'm sure you have seen the commercial about Run Like a Girl. Madonna Badgers, who was a speaker at that event as well, speaks about women, not objects. So as a culture and as a country, have a lot to do to tackle this issue. This is why I don't think it will be tackled in the next year. I think it will be a little bit longer. But those are kind of the dynamics that I see from my perspective being involved in this work.
So Heather,
Do you want me to follow up?
Yeah.
Well, so I'll just say, first of all, thank you so much for hosting this, and I feel very honored to be with this esteemed panel. It's really a privilege. What you said about advertising and media really resonated with me, because that really is the mission behind Geek Girl Rising. What my co-author and I were really seeking to do was really change the narrative of how we see women in tech, and to sort of get away from that stereotype of a hacker in a hoodie, and to really show that there are women working in the industry who've managed to overcome sexism in various ways. It certainly isn't that they haven't faced it or dealt with harassment and other kinds of things, but they've, in our book, we found stories of women who've been able to sort of carve their own path. So that could be deciding to leave the corporate world and launch their own startup. It could be deciding that they want to support women founders and launching a VC fund, or becoming an angel investor and investing their own personal funds. We also profile women on college campuses who are banding together at places like Harvey Mudd and Carnegie Mellon and MIT, where they are creating their own networks to kind of rival the boys club. Because it's not just, I think one of the things, and I'm speaking specifically about computer science and engineering, which, as you know, is incredibly male dominated. So while the challenges that exist overall for women in terms of reaching those leadership positions are, we certainly can look them across the industry, they are certainly even much more challenging in a male-dominated field like computer science and engineering. The number of women who were in the field, well, first of all, I don't know if many of you know this, actually many of you are in tech, so you probably do know this, but women were the majority of computer programmers in the early days. You're shaking your head. And by the mid-'80s, about 30% of people in the workforce were in the computing workforce were women. But that's continued to decline, even with the rise of consumer internet, which is amazing, right? All of us are carrying smartphones right now. Probably none of us in this room can live without FreshDirect and Amazon and all of these things, right? And what's amazing is that all this change was happening, and yet the numbers were going down. The number of women who were deciding to major in computer science and actually persisting through their major continued to decline. So now it's about 18%, whereas in the late 80s it was around 37%. So my point is there's a lot of different reasons for that. One of the big reasons is how computers have been marketed to people in general. The personal computers, the video games, targeted very much at male consumers. And so that message trickles down. In addition, in our country, the way we sort of raise our girls and our boys, this idea of math and science being more for guys than for girls. And those messages filter down. What we tried to show in this book is what the secret sauce was for those women who overcame those kinds of challenges, right? So what was it about the way they were raised, who their parents were, how they dealt with their first jobs, etc., that empowered them to chart this new course and to say, you know what, despite the fact that I may be the only one, and it's really hard to raise money, and I'm feeling this hostility in the workplace, or I'm experiencing sexual harassment, I belong here, and I still feel that I deserve a stake in this digital revolution. So what we're hoping to do with this book is to really invite women into the digital revolution who maybe never really thought of themselves as vested in technology. And so, to your point about advertising and entertainment, our book is being developed for television right now by Kelly Ripa. So we're hoping, we're hoping that, again, kind of reaching a mainstream audience, that we can change the narrative. We can fill what people call the visibility gap of women in tech. So my last point to you is that, all of you in this room who do work in the field, one of the things that you can do to help women advance is to tell your stories. So when you get invited to be on a panel like this, say yes. When you get invited to write an op-ed, or you have an opportunity to blog about something that's in your expertise, go for it, because we need to amplify our own voices and own our expertise. That's going to help the next generation. So I'll leave it at that.
Oh, that's great.
Pass it along for the next question.
What we're going to do is each person will talk to this one, and our goal of this panel is about 40 minutes, so I'm watching really close. People let me know if you have any time issues, and then we'll leave some time for Q&A.
There we go.
So Cheryl, go ahead.
Well, first, thank you all so much for having me here and for letting me join all of you. And I'll keep my remarks quite short. I am somebody who really benefited from having a mom who's a trailblazer. My mom graduated medical school in 1967. She was one of the very first women to graduate in her medical school class. And last week I got to give a talk at Cornell, and she came with me because we both graduated from Cornell. And I actually have 2 daughters on campus, and my oldest one did the interview, and my middle one sat in the audience and gave us signals like, lift your head up or project your voice. So the reason why I bring this up is that it was an overwhelming moment. My mom went to college thinking that she was going to be a high school science teacher, and because somebody took an interest in her, because somebody noticed that maybe she would be a good fit for a research project, she got invited to work with a professor who then later encouraged her to apply to medical school. And when she got in, her parents thought it was a joke. And then when she got engaged, they said, well, of course you'll be dropping out. And I think that this idea of role models is so very important. But I'd like to tell the flip side of the story, since we've basically been hearing how down and out everything is, and that is that the heightened awareness on this issue is really going to be the savior. So the department that I teach in at Columbia Business School, which is the finance department, doesn't have very many women. And actually in the class in particular that I teach, which is advanced investment research, I have many years where I have no women in my class. And so the program has decided that it's doing a special outreach to women. It's like the cure for low prices is low prices, right? And so I really think we're at a wonderful moment in time. We're at a wonderful moment for ourselves, for our daughters, and I think that we're really going to see a very big change because there's been this tremendous spotlight and so much negative news about it. So I feel really good about that future.
Well, thank you, and welcome to our headquarters, and I appreciate everyone coming out this evening. I think that our focus should not be on so much on blaming all the factors that keep us from getting there, but rather focusing on our own power to change that. And I think that my biggest concern is that young women who are now in educational systems that blessedly are allowing young women to be equals and to do sports and to do all the things that they find engaging and that they want to participate in, that they will be lulled into complacency about what happens once you leave school, right? And I think if we don't talk to each other and support each other and congratulate and push each other forward, that 30% who thinks it's okay that there are no women at the top when we all started out together, shame on us, right? And I think the strength comes from us saying, I deserve this. And if you have to be twice as good for half as much, the good news is you are. And I think that that's the message that we have to tell young women, so that they know that there are other women with them who will support them. And if we're not supporting them, then we have no one to blame but ourselves.
Well said. So thank you. I'm Lucy Guernsey. I'm a banker. I've been a banker for about 35 years, but that don't do math. To the entertainment and media world. And in the banking world, as I was 24, women only had clerk jobs. So they all went before me, but I decided I would go through the training program and join the entertainment and media world, which financed Viacom building cable, Time Warner building cable, all the movies you've seen in the world, except Mommy Dearest. We didn't like the wire hanger scene in the script.
That's too much.
It didn't come out in the movie that way. And in the entertainment world, you have the opportunity, if you know what you're doing, to encourage sexual harassment, but it will be rated. And I will say, I think this whole woe is me is your problem, not the men's problem. The men are always going to come after you, whether they're 5 years old or whether they're 50 years old. And it's your decision as to whether you take it. And that's one of the points that leads to every single one of the points you guys said, leadership. So it's, I always tell people it'll be rated, so. But I was asked to say, what is the biggest changes in tech, in the media and entertainment and the finance world? So because all the big production companies, Warner Brothers, Paramount, etc., have been acquired by the corporate people, they have slowly over the last 10 years cut their production budgets down to a bare minimum. So instead of producing 25 films a year, they're producing 15 or acquiring 15. And most of them are sequels, as you well know. The financing has had one of the most dramatic. There are only 12 bankers in the world to this industry. And the studios, the financing is now going private. I sit on boards in a company where the raising of money for movies is now really going private. But on the other side, technology-wise, you can wake up and call yourself a producer anytime you want and provide sexual harassment to anybody you want. And you can actually now make and distribute your own movies on your own. You don't have to rely on this big HBO, Showtime, and things like that. So technologically, I give a seminar on this. We are not only viewing movies differently, but we're cutting the cords. I have a 30-year-old daughter who is incredibly empowered. She's unbelievable. She doesn't have cable, and she does love football, so she goes to the bar to watch the football. But so I think everything you guys have said is incredibly important. But I think it's important for us. I guess the message I'm going to say is, I didn't feel the glass ceiling or any restriction because I was specialized and I went after that. That's what you have to do.
Yeah.
You have to go after what you want and not let people tread you down. So A second question I was given was, what advice do you have to encourage women to join this organization? And I think that all of you should walk away with saying, what added value did this give me today? Because there's a lot of organizations you can belong to that, yeah, you go to, and you may even pay money to join it for a year, and you go to various things, but what added value did it give you, networking and things like that? But I think tracking the change in technology in all of our fields is now one of the most important things in life, because if you miss that technology change, you're probably going to miss out on being able to take advantage of it, whether you're male or female. So I think this organization is one that you should keep the pulse on.
So pass the mic. We're gonna. What's the thing? Drop the mic. After I do my karaoke song, ask you. I won't sing. Although everybody knows how I like to sing. What is going to introduce this one?
So, and all of you have alluded to this, but we'd love to hear from you on what advice you have to encourage women to be more involved in STEM. And some of you have touched on this, but we'd love to hear more about this topic.
Oh, you want me to go first? Okay. Well, I think I referenced it before, but the idea that we're living in a tech-enabled world, so it's really incumbent on all of us to, as much as we can, become literate in some way. And what's so amazing is, thanks to technology, there are so many online courses and easy ways to get acclimated and just sort of learn the basics. Not so much that you're going to go on and become a computer programmer, but I do think that understanding how things work is really essential in this new economy, and being able to know the lingo. So no matter what field you're in, whether it's marketing or law or you're a TV news reporter, that you understand how things are built, and that you have a comfort level with that. That said, I think the other thing, and this is a big takeaway from the book, is this idea of getting out of your comfort zone and getting out of this feeling, like I'm sure so many of you have probably heard this research that I think was from Harvard Business School about how, men will apply for a job if they meet 3 of the 10 criteria, so something like that, and women will only apply if they meet 9, right? And so that's a problem. One of my most favorite stories from the book, if I could just share with you, we had the privilege of interviewing Tracy Chow, who you may know was the lead software engineer at Pinterest, who has since left, but she is the woman who wrote the essay asking where are the numbers. That was one of the pivotal calls to action that ultimately got the big tech companies to start revealing their workforce data. But she told us this great story. Okay, she's brilliant. She went to Stanford, and when she was in the sort of what they call sort of the Weeder class, the CS class, I think it was called CS 107. So she was in this class, and the teacher every week would ask the class. He would come at the end of the week, after he'd given them an assignment. He would say, "Raise your hand. How many people in the class did it take you 0 to 10 hours? Raise your hand at the assignment. How many people did it take you 10 to 20 hours? And then how many people more than 20 hours?" So of course, all the guys in the class are raising their hands for 0 to 10. And she's looking around going, "Oh my God, like I'm failing. This is taking me 30 hours. Like why, I must be terrible at this." So she gets through the class. She ends up doing so well that the professor actually approaches her at the end and asks her to be a TA the next semester. And she really said this, she said, "I think you have the wrong person." And he said, "No, I have the right person. Do you want the job?" So she said, okay, she took the job, and this is why I'm telling you the story. The next semester, she was the TA, and she was grading the assignments. And what do you think she found out? All those guys that were saying that it only took them 0 to 10, they either didn't do it right, or it clearly took them much longer than that. And that was like such a great insight for her, because oftentimes women, we have trouble getting out of our comfort zone, and we have trouble feeling confident in our abilities. And it's this lifetime of being told that we have to be perfect and we have to get all A's and we have to be this and that and we're only good at certain things and we have, it's this fixed mindset versus a growth mindset. And so I just love that story because the reality is that that insight for her was everything, because it made her realize that she really did have it, but she was putting herself down that first semester. So anyway, I think that for me that was a great takeaway from this book. So many I'm sure people in this room, so many women suffer from imposter syndrome where we feel like we're always questioning, like, are we really good enough, or do we really deserve to be sitting here, or should we really be asking for that raise? And the reality is the guys are asking for it, and we should too.
I would love to elaborate on this. I think we're all getting very excited here at the panel. So I think you're raising a very good point, Heather. This is a lot about, the imposter syndrome, as you were speaking about. And when we speak about imposter syndrome, it's actually the correlation between competence and confidence, right? So an imposter syndrome is actually when you have a high level of competence and a low level of confidence, and the two aren't related. And we see this very often where, as women, we may maximize and minimize, right? Oh, it's not good enough, so we're minimizing our results, and we may be maximizing our failures. And why is this important? It's because when we look at success, what we actually see, that success is as closely correlated to competence as it is to confidence. Might be a little bit of a problem. So that means that if you come into the room and you show up very confidently and raise your hand, you will actually get that stress assignment, where the person next to you, who may actually be more competent but is quiet, may not get that. So confidence is a really important point, and thank you for pointing that out. And getting out of your comfort zone is one of the most important aspects to growth. And so this is also, when we speak later on maybe about the pay gap, one of the reasons why there is a pay gap is because women don't raise always their hands to get the raise, but also because women are not always taking on the stress assignments, right? So I loved when what you said, I'm a big believer in empowerment, and I think, we can do anything we put our mind to. And so I think it's really important to navigate, the company climate, if that makes sense, and really know how you want to communicate and how do you want to show up. So I speak a lot about projecting personal power. And so when you talk about personal power, I always say it's the difference between if you have arrogance on this side and insecurity on this side. And by the way, arrogance and insecurity are actually, there's definitely a link there. In the middle is projecting personal power. And so if I'm projecting personal power, I feel pretty good about myself and have a lot of clarity and I know what I stand for, but I also feel very good about who you are, right? So when I project personal power, I actually don't need to be the first one to speak. And I'm going to say, I want to really hear what you have to say. So you show a lot of respect. This is how you build relationship. And you really listen. And then by the time you're being asked a question, you actually feel very comfortable to step into that space and speak about your expertise because you have that expertise, right? So projecting personal power is, when we think about charisma, it's actually the people that make other people feel strong and good, that actually do really well from a leadership perspective. It's a coaching element and everything like that. I'll have so much more to say about this topic, but I'm going to give it to someone else. Really, such an important topic. Thank you.
Well, I certainly agree with what both of you have been saying, and what you're really talking about is how to work with and work through ambiguity, right? And so what that really takes is to have some sense that when you're solving for an important but an uncertain future of your own, how is it that you go about making your decisions? And that's what my book is about, right? And it basically talks about the idea that we all come with these mental shortcuts. You were talking about the biases before of other people, but we're all laden with them ourselves, right? We're all flawed thinkers. We tend to think, for instance, that most of us are better than average drivers, right?
I don't think that's
Or we tend to have the planning fallacy, which is even though you've done the task before, you tend to underestimate the amount of time that it's going to take you to complete it. And so what we really need when we're faced with high-stakes decisions is a way that we can control for and counteract these cognitive biases that we have, and also have an opportunity to better understand the incentives and motives of the other people that we're dealing with, because we don't operate in a vacuum, right? We all operate in a very rich stakeholder environment. And so if we want to be able to have decisions that we're making that have a good chance of succeeding, we need to understand something that I actually think of as uniquely feminine, which is we need to have a collaborative backbone, right? We need a way to be able to step into the incentives and motives of others and have an opportunity for it to mirror back on us. Well, what does that mean about how we think and feel, so that we can assess our own assumptions and judgments and have an opportunity, therefore, to solve our problems in a way that addresses them holistically so that they have a good chance of succeeding. And what my book takes you through is it introduces my AREA method. AREA is an acronym for the steps of my decision-making process. And there's about 5 updates to the research and pedagogy related to decision-making. But really what it's about is perspective taking, is because perspective taking gives you that beautiful 2-for-1. It allows you to walk in the footsteps of other people, to understand how they think and feel and why they're behaving how they are. And it gives you an opportunity then to gain distance on your subject matter so that you can ask yourself, is there any evidence for the assumptions that I'm making myself? And so it really marries the social performance side of human behavior with the evaluation and metric part of decision making. Because if we could ever truly master a decision-making system, we'd all be able to lead a more meaningful life. And at its core, there's really 2 kinds of learning. There's knowledge and skill. And what's nice about a decision-making system like the AREA method is that it's a skill. I can teach it to you, and it can become yours, and then you can use it however you'd like.
Well, I'll be brief. I think there are some fundamental things that we need to look at about how we raise women and what we teach them about what's nice. And that asking for what you know in your heart you deserve can be looked at as not nice or not ladylike or not, what a girl ought to do. And I think we have to look at ourselves and say, and believe that we are deserving of asking, and we have to accept our own strengths and be proud of it before we can expect somebody else to do that. And so I think that that's something I still struggle with. I hear my mother, who is still alive, saying, you did very well on that, but we don't want you to seem like you're boasting, and it takes a long time to get over that and say, this is not boasting, this is not bragging, this is something I do well, and I'm good at it, and I deserve the opportunity to do that. And I think the more we can see our own inhibitions and not teach that to the next generation of young women, the more successful we will be.
I think what Gwen is speaking about goes a lot to clarity, and that's what I was speaking about earlier. When you think about projecting personal power, it goes to having clarity about, this is who I am, these are my strengths, these are my accomplishments, and I'm feeling good about that. And it also goes to self-acceptance, understanding that we're all perfectly imperfect, and we don't have to do everything perfect. So we can do, instead of the 30 hours, we probably would do equally well if we only took 20 hours to go. So this perfection idea is a really important component. And since we're talking about the tech world, I love Reshma Saujana, who is the founder of Girls Who Code. And I love to quote her because she speaks so often about, let's be bold and not perfect. And I think that if we teach that to our children, and quite frankly, if we teach that to our friends and we tell ourselves that, then we would be in a much better place. So thank you for that, Glenn. I think it's a really important component.
Right, and before Lucy, Lucy, we want you to talk, because I think what's so interesting is, like, some of us grew up with Malcolm Gladwell's, tipping point, and the methodology that 10,000 extra hours will make you great. And I love all what you're saying, because it's really, we should just be really happy with who we are and being perfectly imperfect, and encourage our daughters to do the same. So Lucy, you want to add, and then what we'll do is we'll do individual questions. Good. Or do you
Well,
wanna,
I
like,
think I did do my
we did-
bit.
Yeah, but you did it. All right, then great. So let's go to individual. Well, let's give Lucy her individual question.
I just got it. I just got
Oh,
it.
and she got it.
I did it.
Okay, so we'll get a new one for you.
The audience can ask me a question.
So Lucy, tell us, what do you see really, tell us like with some of the movie industry, you've been doing some gaming work as well, like where do you see that kind of going? Do you see many women in gaming? You kind of talked about that somewhat, but where do you see as an opportunity for more women in that industry?
Well, I think the entertainment industry,
Video games, yeah.
whether it be content, creating content, distributing content, there is no glass ceiling in the entertainment industry. What is important in the entertainment industry is money. You can't do anything without money. Except technology is helping change that, because you can buy a Mac computer
And do great things.
and you can do great things. I don't know how to do this. I'm not looking to learn. But there's some amazing things that are gonna, music is unbelievable what's happening in music, i.e. So the studios are closing down, they have a huge pipeline to fill, but they don't have enough staff to fill it. It's being replaced by Hulu, Amazon, Netflix, blah, blah, blah. The studios aren't moving fast enough to streaming. So there's all opportunities for women in all fields. I know women who run theatrical distribution companies, women who are producers. There's no barrier, because there's no more, it's not as if the actresses are now controlled by the studios, as in the old days, and things like that. You can call yourself an actress and put yourself in a film and get it out there. The thing is, the studios used to control getting it out there, so there is no barrier to entry anymore, except money.
When you say privatization, what does that mean? Do you mean like people are raising it? Tell us something.
There are only 12 places to go for money
What do you mean?
commercially, like banks, and that's a very small field. So what's happening is those banks are getting more conservative about lending money anyway to the independents, to you who wake up and want to be a producer. So there's a lot of private money that's moving into this industry here and there. It's very hard to find equity, but not hard to find loans. So it's moving away from the big banks, the smaller independent stuff.
Kind
And
of like Black Swan, the group that got behind Black, was it Black?
I don't remember.
Yeah, it was a group out of Texas, owned that money that did it.
Yes, there's a lot of money that comes out of Texas.
Good old Texas, right? We love Texas, right then? So why don't we do Gwen? So we have a question for you.
Okay.
Gwen, how is LLS creating opportunities for women and girls in STEM fields specifically?
Well, I think the most important way is that we have a multitude of different research grant opportunities that start at a very junior level, all the way up to big collaborative grants. And the review process has changed substantially from, the big professors at the 5 big, medical centers, cancer centers, getting together in a room and making the decision about which of their boys they're going to give the grants to. That doesn't happen anymore, and it's a much more equitable process that is based on the science rather than on who wrote the grant and where they are and who their mentor is, right? So the grant process in the past has been very much based on, did you have the good luck and good fortune to get chosen to be in the right big man's lab? And if you weren't, you were struggling because no one would recognize your work because it wasn't blessed by, someone who had already gotten, to X point. Now it is much more based on the science and have a much more diverse panel looking at the science to decide what's exciting and what's new. So if you're smart and you're good, you have an equal chance of being accepted and being given a grant. And I think that that will help younger women stay in the sciences and not have to, slave in someone's lab if they actually have an idea of their own. And I think that that will really make a huge difference, I hope, in keeping women in the sciences, because it's not an easy profession to be in.
Gwen, tell us one more thing too, because as Deb alluded to earlier, LLS is all about research.
Mhm.
That's the focus. So one of the big things that's really exciting, and I hope everybody doesn't mind that I mention this, that we're doing that's really breakthrough, is the AML research. Do you want to talk about that for a minute?
Sure. So I think this is interesting also because it's collaborative.
Right.
So we know that AML, which is acute myeloid leukemia, is the one leukemia, acute leukemia, that we have not seen dramatic progress, while in many of the other blood cancers we've had a lot of new therapeutics and a lot of progress. The standard therapy is still what I would give patients when I was a fellow. And I did not get this gray hair for nothing. It was a long time ago. So, this has not had the benefit of the science translating into new treatments. Why is that? Well, it's a relatively rare disease. The patients are incredibly sick. And it is not, I was told when I was in pharma that when I said I think this would be a great agent to move into AML, since that was my area of expertise, that AML was the graveyard of drug development. That you could never get a drug developed there, the patients were too sick, it was too hard, we just couldn't move it forward, and there wasn't a business case. That, for someone who has taken care of patients with acute leukemia, not to mention anyone who has had a loved one have acute leukemia, is devastating. So LLS took it on, and this is before my tenure here. I'm very happy to be part of it, to try and do a different way. And so they have developed what we call a master trial, where we look at the patient's genetic makeup of their tumor and then start a therapeutic pathway based on that tumor abnormality. The novelty of this is that this is a very acute disease, and we're able to keep the patient safe long enough to get the genetic testing done in a timely fashion, make a decision, and put them on a clinical trial during their initial therapy, rather than treating someone at the end of life when there isn't much hope. We have 7 pharmaceutical partners now. We hope it will be up to 10. We have 10 investigational sites. And the FDA invited us with a number of other independent organizations to come down and talk about how we did this, because they've recently published that this may be the wave of the future for diseases where we haven't made progress and where there isn't a large patient population, so that advocacy organizations can start to push for the patients who are not being attended to by bigger pharma. And pharma is happy to have that opportunity, so it works as a win-win. And the most exciting part is that we hold the IND, which is the Investigational New Drug Development, which means we're the sponsors of the trial. We're the ones that make sure it happens, not a pharmaceutical company, not a collaborative group of scientists this is us. And that hasn't been done before. So the fact that we have been able, in the less than a year that it's been open, to accrue 110 patients is really extraordinary. And we're very excited where this may lead to faster decisions about new therapeutics. And we hope it'll be extended to other areas.
Fantastic.
So Cheryl.
Well, I just want to say that's terrific.
Thank you.
It's such nice news to hear all
Yeah.
the good things that you guys are doing here, and the number of not only patients but family members and loved ones who can really benefit from that work.
Thank you.
Yes, I wish you all the success, of course.
Thank
Cheryl,
you.
thank you. So Grace is going to ask you your question.
Cheryl, we'd love to hear more about the area method. Could you choose a business case from the book that you think best illustrates how that decision-making process works?
Sure. So one of the book follows 4 high-stakes decisions, 2 personal decisions and 2 professional decisions. And since we're really focusing on women here, maybe I'll tell the story of Claudia, who was in the advertising business and really felt that that business was being disintermediated by what was happening really in technology. And so she was looking for another career path. And she was thinking about 2 completely different fields. She was quite handy with computers, and so she thought about computer programming. And then another option that she was considering was nursing. These are 2 totally different career paths. And before she went ahead and did this and make this big decision, not only for herself but for her family, she really thought that it made sense to try out the area method and to use a decision-making system. And so the first thing that's new about the area method is really that it inverts decision-making. Right? When you're staring down a complex problem, many times people find it rather frustrating. Where do you start? How do you look for information? And so the area method says, don't worry about that. Instead, turn it upside down and ask yourself something that's actually far more empowering, which is, what constitutes success for you personally? Right? So even though you may not know where you're going to end up, by inverting the problem and saying, what do I need to have to see happen in the outcome to know that that decision has succeeded, you now can, instead of entering into an open-ended research project, you can come up with what I call your critical concepts, which are the 1, 2, or 3 things that really matter to you in the outcome to be able to tell your story of success. So now instead of that open-ended research project, you're deeply and creatively investigating only those few things that get you to your vision of success. So for her, she knew that she wanted to have an opportunity to grow as an individual, to grow as a professional. She wanted to be able to also enter into a field where she thought she could have continual professional development, not something like the field that she had been in that she really felt it was going away in terms of the experience and the type of actual task that she was being asked to do. So in the A phase of her research, which stands for the absolute phase, that's when you're close up on the targets of your research decision. Now her decision was binary, right? It was either nursing or computer programming. But when I use the term absolute targets, it's actually what your opportunity set is. So if you're thinking about growing your business and you're thinking about maybe 3 different options, you actually would have 3 different targets. If you're considering what's the right place for your aging parents and you're looking at care facilities that offer a continuum of care, maybe it's 5 or 6 different targets that you're looking at. So anyway, she began close up. Instead of typing into Google computer science, computer programming, and nursing, she knew that if she were to do that, not only would Google be giving her those answers in a biased way, but she would be mixing together all the different perspectives at the same time. And that wouldn't allow her an opportunity to really understand, how do these fields describe themselves? How do they really talk about the value proposition that they have? So she started off specifically by looking at computer programming places that were in a geographic distance that made sense for her. How did each of these individual places talk about themselves? What did they seem to be offering? There's a lot of these technology boot camps now. So it looks like maybe you could go into a 3-month program and come out with a computer programming license. And when she started just from close up, for instance, on these programs, she read about how they talked about themselves, and she noticed that there was a lot of information that was left out, right? They gave all sorts of statistics, for instance, for how they actually placed people in jobs, but they didn't talk about the construction of those statistics. What kind of jobs were they actually placing people in? After how many days? How long did those people last in those positions? And then she also looked close up on nursing programs in her area to find out what it would be like to look at what the offerings are. In her relative phase of research, that's the next concentric circle of information. Those are secondary and tertiary sources, sources that are somehow related to the target of her decision. She looked at what did industry papers and academicians have to say about the types of programs that she was looking at. And she found out, in fact, for instance, that the construction of the statistics for the job placement for the computer programming fields was actually not as advertised. And she was so happy that she had looked behind them, because many of them talked about what is the total placement number, when it turned out that it could be any placement. It could be in a waitress job, for instance. And she also was able to look at, for instance, U.S. News and World Report for the nursing programs in her area. How did these programs tend to do in terms of how they placed people in jobs, and what types of different programs did they offer? Because the very interesting thing about nursing is that it turns out that there's many different job descriptions now.
Absolutely.
In her exploration phase, in the E phase of the word area, you're actually entering into what I call the twin engines of creativity. Area exploration is about getting beyond document-based sources to actually identifying good prospects, good people to talk to, and asking them great questions. There she was able to actually talk to people at the different places that she was evaluating. She talked to current students, she talked to former students. She also reached out to the major employers that hired out of those programs. Did they find at the local hospitals that nurses who came out of the couple different programs that she was evaluating, were they ready for those jobs? How often now did the basic nursing degree not live up to its expectation? Because there are so many new ways that people have nursing, has there been sort of grade inflation, where actually getting a nursing degree wouldn't be enough on its own? And she also found out in computer programming something that she hadn't really understood, which is that while nursing begins in the same place and then fans out into many different branches, it's the inverse for computer programming. It's entirely path dependent. You've got to choose which language you're going to be studying when you start. How do you know that you're picking the iPhone versus the BlackBerry? This became something that she was so glad that she actually reached out to people to talk to, because when you look at the specific programs at the Flatiron School and some of these other places, they offer a couple different languages, and you've got to pick which one you're going to start in on. Then the second part, if exploration is about expanding your research breadth, exploitation is about turning the lens of research inward on yourself as a decision maker, to really think about your assumptions against your evidence. And that chapter really discusses a series of exercises that I've learned from other disciplines like investigative journalism and medicine and intelligence gathering, where you're really looking at your assumptions against your evidence in an exercise like a competing alternative hypothesis exercise, where you look at all of the hypotheses that you're thinking about for your decision outcome. And it really takes you through the idea that the most likely hypothesis is actually not the one with the most confirming data. You can have a lot of confirming data, but if you have one insurmountable hurdle, that hypothesis is not going to work out for you. So it's actually the one with the least disconfirming data. And so this is one of those things where it takes a very short amount of time, and yet people are often resisting to putting pen to paper or typing it into the keyboard. But when you sit down and you actually look at, what am I assuming, and do I have evidence to back it up? And what does that mean about my likelihood of success? It can really change the trajectory of your understanding of your own information. And it can also drive you back into earlier parts of the process to either gather new data or potentially to do more analysis. And then the final analysis phase of the area process, she really sat down and recognized that in exploration, she had actually stopped into the exhibition center at a couple different conferences, one for nursing and one for computer programming. And these exhibition halls, they're free. She was able to walk right in and get a sense of who actually works in these fields, right? What does the day look like? And what she noticed about nursing is there were men and women of all ages and all backgrounds. And she immediately felt like this is going to be a really diverse and interesting group of people. And when she went into computer programming, and maybe this will change in the future, but as you may well know, she saw a lot of relatively young men. And it really showed her that although both could be interesting, that she really liked the idea that nursing started in one place and could go many places, and she didn't feel comfortable with the path dependency that computer programming asked for. So the analysis chapter really helps you think about how can you make your mistakes before you make them.
Before
And
committing.
so
Yeah.
it introduces you to an exercise that's called the pre-mortem, which as a doctor, you know the post-mortem. The joke on the post-mortem is that everybody benefits except for the patient,
Right.
because it's when the autopsy is done. But the
Yeah.
pre-mortem, I think, is really a terrific thought exercise. It says, imagine that your decision has failed before you've even executed it. Now tell the story of that failure. How did it fail? Where did it fail? Why did it fail? And what's so interesting about that is now you can see how it might go awry before you've even made it, and you get a wonderful opportunity to really scaffold what safeguards could you set up so that you are able to prevent your decision from failing in that way. So that even though she picked nursing, she still had an opportunity to think about how it might not work out for her and what would she need to do to try to make it as successful as possible. So that was one example of using the area method.
Excellent. So Heather, tell us, we're going to the line, and then we'll do these individual questions, and then we'll do some Q&A. Is everybody okay? So Heather, tell us, why do you invest in women-owned companies, and what's your favorite case study from your book?
Okay. I could really use the area method, by the way. I'm listening to you going, wow, that really would have come in handy if I'd known about it before, but I'm going to buy the book tonight for sure. So I got involved in angel investing a few years ago through a program called the Pipeline Angels. And what it is it's a boot camp to train women to invest in women-led social ventures. And so essentially, as I explained it to my kids, it was like Shark Tank for women. It was a cohort of 11 of us, all different backgrounds. I don't think we had anybody in our group who actually came from finance. Just everyone had a different type of background. We were all interested in supporting women. And we spent 6 months learning how to make investments. So we were trained by a group called Golden Seeds, which is one of the most active angel investing networks in the country that's devoted to women, which I'm also a member there as well. I later joined Golden Seeds. But, you know, we were coached by them on everything from, you know, how do you assess a business plan? What's a term sheet? How do you do diligence? All this stuff. And so there were 50 companies that pitched us, and we had to narrow it down to 10. And then we had this amazing pitch competition that was hosted by the Tory Burch Foundation, and we flew in the 10 founders, and they pitched us. Then we whittled it down to 3, and then we really dug in deep on the diligence. And ultimately, we ended up, as a cohort, funding a company called CSA Trading Company, which is actually based in Mamaroneck. It's a fair trade. It's not a tech company, but it's a fair trade hot cocoa and baking mix startup. And you know, this young woman raised her first money on Kickstarter. She raised like $18,000 on Kickstarter, and she's now in 4,000 stores around the country. Whole Foods, I mean, all the big ones. We, you know, our group, we were just sort of along for the ride. And so why did I get involved in this? You know, solving this issue around diversity in tech and closing this diversity gap, which, by the way, it's not just a gender gap. It is very much a diversity gap,
Yes.
which I really think is important to say. But it's a very nuanced problem. It has to do with the pipeline. It has to do with corporate leadership. But it also has to do with capital for these female founders and people of color who have these great ideas and don't have the network that white men have. And when they get after bootstrapping for a long time, they finally get to the point that they are ready to raise venture capital, they're walking into these situations where, you know, less than 10% of the decision makers in these firms are women. And single digit numbers are people of color. And so it's incredibly difficult. And so for me personally, being able to, in my own small way, be able to support some of these businesses and then be able to apply my media expertise as an advisor to help them has been just, you know, incredibly gratifying. So of course, that inspired one of the chapters in the book, which is called Feminist Financiers, where we profile some of the more prolific angel investors and also women who are starting their own venture capital firms. My favorite story, I'll just make it very brief. That actually was one of my favorite chapters to write. But one of my favorite people is a woman named Arlen Hamilton, who is the founder of Backstage Capital. And Backstage Capital is a micro VC fund which invests in underrepresented founders. So they invest in women, people of color, LGBTQ, anybody who really has not been seen by the venture capital world. I mean, she really specializes in finding these companies that have been ignored. And how does she get her deal flow? Well, she finds people who are like her. And what I love about her is not only the fact that she's now funded 50 companies, and I actually was with her I was on a panel at MIT a few weeks ago for the Forbes Under 30, where we did like a takeover of the MIT Media Lab, and Arlen was there. And but what I love about her is that she's she doesn't look like anybody in venture capital at all, but she's getting people like Mark Andreessen to fund her fund and invest in her. Why? Because what she's doing is really smart. She's surfacing this deal flow that these VCs are not seeing.
Not on
And
your
she
radar.
is it's great. And she really came from nothing. So we are in the process of putting together an adaptation of the book for children. And so I had the opportunity to actually interview Arlen's mom last week. And I knew a little bit about her background, but I mean, this is a young woman who, grew up in Houston, a single mom who by day worked at the telephone company and by night worked at 7-Eleven. And Arlen was just this kid that always, it's kind of what we were talking about before, she was born with this idea that, nothing was going to hold her back. If she wanted it, she was going to go for it. No one was going to tell her that she couldn't do it. And she's African American, by the way, and she's a lesbian, and she's very open about this, and she's been open about it pretty much her whole life. And she ultimately, just very quickly, so she started out in the music business. She went to a Janet Jackson concert when she was like in high school and decided that she wanted to work in music. So she's based in Houston. How does she do that? She doesn't know anyone in the music industry at all. She just starts, reaching out to random people. And and ultimately, through the years, she ends up becoming a tour manager for like CeeLo Green and Jason Derulo. And, she has this amazing life where she was touring the world. So during that time, she was starting to read about how Ashton Kutcher and Ellen DeGeneres and all these big celebrities were starting to invest in tech companies. So she thought, well, I don't have my own means necessarily, but I'd love to be in that world. So she starts cold emailing some of the biggest VCs in the Valley, like Chris Sacca and, like I said, Mark Andreessen, and she says, I kind of just want to learn. You don't know me, but I just want to learn about this. And a lot of them responded, and over 3 years, there's a whole, you can read the book, but there's a whole other thing where she was homeless for a while, and she was accepted into this program at Stanford to train VCs, and anyway, ultimately it all worked out, and she's now in the process of raising a second fund, and she's just doing amazing work. And what I love about her story is just that it's so unexpected, but she's just someone who just said, I'm not going to let anything hold me back. And I don't care what the barriers are. I'm just going to go for it. And I love that. So that's why she's one of my favorite people.
Oh, I think she's one of my favorite people too. Thank you so much.
So Ariane, as we conclude, we'd just love to hear, what do you think is the most important piece of advice that you would give future leaders, both men and women?
Wow.
And what perspective also on asking for a raise?
Okay, so I'm going to say, these inspiring stories, that's kind of the most important advice, and that is to be bold. It is about clarity and understanding what you want, and then going for it, right? It's getting out of that comfort zone and saying, I don't need to be perfect. This is what I want. I'm going to, I always say by the time that people who want to be perfect are standing at the start line, all the other people have gone before you, and they fell down, but they got back up, and I think that that's a really important component. I will say that probably, if I look at, what makes people successful, I think there's a couple of things, and that might be a bit of good advice, right? So now how we spoke earlier about competence and confidence, so I do think, you know, to be successful, it's important to be competent. I think we would all agree with that, right? And that's actually not so easy today, right? It was a lot easier, you know, 50, 60 years ago, but because of the technology changing, you know, to be competent, you have to stay up to date and relevant. So it change, you know, what is true today is not true tomorrow. So it's actually not that easy. So if I take that as the baseline, I would say that the next level up is the whole aspect of interpersonal skills. So you can be the smartest person in the room, but if you know, there's a difference, I always say, between being right and getting it right. So if you're the smartest person in the room, but you don't know how to speak around that, you know, you're not going to be able to influence or convince other people, right? And so interpersonal skills, one of the most important aspects, and that goes a lot to how do you communicate, how do you build trust and respect, you know, this whole aspect of relationship building. We spoke about collaborating, you know, and connecting with other people. I don't like the word networking. I really feel it's about connecting. I think we've all connected here today, right? There's a lot of good energy in the room, and that's what I mean by connecting. So those interpersonal skills are really important. How do you show up? The aspect I was talking about earlier about projecting personal power, and how do you do that? So if number one, the competence and those interpersonal skills kind of indicate your potential, I'm going to say it's about positive intelligence that lets you live up to your potential. And what do I mean by positive intelligence? Positive intelligence is how do you use your brain power? Are you using that to sabotage you, or are you actually using it to help you? And you kind of can think about it as if your brain power is 100%, you know, am I going to be like, you know, the star in her story, and I'm going to just be bold, and I'm going to cold call everyone, and I'm just not going to think about it, because this is who I am, and this is what I like to do. Or am I going to really worry about it? And am I going to think about it, and think about it a little bit more? And, you know, when you're in a meeting, am I going to raise this question, or is everyone going to think I'm, you know, not so smart? But just raise it, you know, and raise up your hand and give your question. So the positive intelligence aspect is really important. I always say, you know, so if you worry a lot, and you know, if you have 100% brain capacity and you worry 20% of that, you can only spend the other 8% on moving things forward. And worrying is probably one of the most unproductive emotions. I always say worry doesn't make tomorrow lighter, it actually makes today heavier. Worry is not going to do anything for you. As a matter of fact, it shuts down your prefrontal cortex, and you won't be able to make the best decisions for yourself, right? Or I think it was Hemingway who said, if I wouldn't have worried about all the things that never happened, I would have had a great life. So I think we can learn a little bit from that. But so for me, those three elements are really important, and that, you know, the interpersonal skills goes a lot to projecting that outward confidence, and then the whole positive intelligence goes to inner confidence, and that goes a lot to clarity and constantly getting out of your comfort zone and saying, hey, you know, I tried on this new thing, and it actually went pretty well. You know, these are, I always say, look at when you try something new, say these are the 8, 9 things I did really well. And even if it didn't go so well, there's always still 8 or 9 things. Even if you lose your tennis game, you always will have done some things right. And then think about the one thing you might want to improve. This goes to the growth mindset, Carol Dweck. Anyway, I think those are some of the most important aspects to think about.
Oh my gosh, absolutely excellent. Thank you, everyone. I really think the panel was fantastic. So what questions do we have in the audience? Courtney.
Hi, I'm applying to grad school and for fall 18. What is your best advice to someone that wants to be like a woman executive as I crack my applications with the mindset I'm going into it that my GMAT scores and my grade scores may not be at what a top tier school is looking for?
Who wants to take that one? A professor?
Yeah.
And what are like our lights? What happened?
First, good luck to you.
Yeah.
That's a very exciting
Yeah.
phase of life to be in. You know, so I think graduate school is so different from undergraduate, right? Because you're going into generally a kind of a trade school, right? You're going into something that's going to give you a specific degree in something, for the most part. And so, you know, it's a wonderful moment for you to actually think about this idea of inverting the problem, right? What does constitute success for you personally? What would you need to have to see happen in the outcome to know that that decision has succeeded? And once you can get really clear on why it is you are applying to the programs that you're applying to, I think it makes writing the application much easier because you really know what you want out of those programs, right? And I think that's a beautiful place to start. And I think also it's a really nice opportunity for you to also look at what are the schools that you're applying to. And if you apply a system like the area method or your own decision-making system, if you have something that you use that you like, you can really match up what you're considering to be your vision of success with what the schools are offering. Because each of those schools are offering what they consider to be their most compelling narrative. Is it a narrative that is really talking about its august history? Maybe it's a place that has a lot of Nobel Prize winners. Or is it a place that's very outward focused on making sure that you have a lot of opportunities to participate in clubs and in different kinds of internships? Or is it a place that really stresses the student to teacher ratio and experiential learning? Each of these places, then, you'll have a better opportunity to match up against what you constitute to be your success. And it can help really to make for an experience that you really feel is well aligned with what you consider to be your values and where you want to come out on the other side.
Wow, that was
Thank you.
Yeah.
That was a good answer.
If you need breakfast, let us know. Who else? Anybody else? I know there's some questions out there. Please.
Hi, I'm Lori. It seems to me that nonprofits, there's a lot of women in senior leadership positions. And is that good or bad?
Ooh, should we go to Dr. Grant?
I think women in senior leader positions is always good.
Yes.
I think that, there are a lot of questions about, well, there are now more women in medicine. Is that because the profession is no longer as vaunted? I think that the understanding of mission fits naturally with a lot of professions that women have a higher percentage in the social sciences, now in medicine, thank goodness, and that naturally moves to not-for-profit. I think the men that are in the not-for-profit world are actually, for the most part, quite extraordinary. I don't know how many of you have met Dr. Liu, but he's fantastic and is really, a human. And I think that's really a good thing. Do I think that it implies that that'll happen in other professions? I hope so, because I think it creates a new norm.
Great. What else? Anybody else have a question? Oh, please. Then we'll go to Catherine.
So, talk about balance, because now I'm sort of on the other side of the arch of my career, and it's very difficult to raise kids, have a husband, and in a sense do it all, that horrible thing that I was told that we could do, but it was not really possible to do.
I think that's an excellent question. Tell me your name.
Andrea.
Andrea, and I'm really glad you're bringing this up, right? Because balance is a really important aspect, and being from the Netherlands, I think we figured out balance there a little bit better. There is this we say in the Netherlands, we work to live and not the other way around, right? So actually, one of the first things that I noticed when I came to the United States, I read an article in the Wall Street Journal, this was probably in month one that I came to the United States. And there was this great article about this most successful woman at Wall Street. I forgot her name. And it was a full-page article, and her boss wrote down like one column. And the 3/4 of the column was about the aspect that she had delivered a baby and was back on the job in 3 days, right? And I was thinking, this is fascinating. Here's this amazing person who probably has, brokered some of the biggest deals on Wall Street. And this is kind of a symbol of her success. That was a little bit hard for me. So I really connect with your question. And I think that balance is a really important question to ask yourself. I think it's an individual question as well. So I really feel, there was another article, I think it was actually in the New York Times, about that women feel guilty whether they work and are not as much with their kids, or when they all stay at home and don't work. I really think balance is a personal question. And it's interesting, I do a lot of work for iRelaunch, which you may know, which is a company that helps women return to the workforce after they take a career break. Carol Fishman-Cohen, who started that company, is one of the pioneers in this work. And we focus a lot on 4 C's. One is the C of the content of the job you want to do. The other C is the culture of the company, and then the compensation, and the C of control, right? And we see when women want to return back to the career, control becomes really important, and control stands for how many hours do I want to work, and how does work fits into my overall life. This is actually something that was brought up in this particular research as well. So I think, to go back to your question, it is an individual question. And the good news is, with the workplace, the future of work is completely changing, and we see a lot more opportunities where people actually are working part-time or virtual, and this is also driven by millennials, quite frankly, where they ask that same question as you are asking. So, someone said earlier, I'm optimistic, and I'm naturally optimistic. So I actually think that this question that you're asking about balance is going to look better 10 years from now than it's looking now, because I think more people are raising that question. Does that answer it a little bit?
Well, I think it's funny a little bit, because in 10 years, a number of us are going to be, we're going to be exiting completely the workforce. So the question is,
Maybe not.
maybe not.
I'm working as a
That's
greeter at
true.
Walmart. I'm saying hello to Disney Bus.
I think the question was really meant more for the younger people here, as you start coming up through your career, that you you may start full force and say, wow, I'm going to be involved, whatever, and then all of a sudden, wait, I want to have kids, and you don't know what that's like until they're there. Sorry. And how do you manage that? Because you're right, organizations, there's more opportunity than when I first started working to work remotely, whatever. But a lot of organizations still don't really accept that. They want you to be around, they want you to be there. And are you really committed, or are you not?
So there's something called date night, which is really important to have. And we started it the 3 days after my daughter was born. I went to work 3 weeks after she was born. But it's really important to get out of the house for 3 hours. Hire a local kid for $20 or whatever it is.
Whatever the going rate is
And-
now. Yeah.
And go out for a drink and talk about things to be with your husband, because you cannot be with your husband when the kids are in the room or in the house. So that's really important, because we got a lot accomplished, every week. And without the child being in the room. It's really, and then if you're at the edge of your career, you can probably look at some of the things that you do and maybe treat yourself and hire somebody to do it for you.
My kids are in college, so I'm not.
Yeah.
My daughter's out and she's still.
So if everybody wants the report that we have been talking about, it's the McKinsey and Lean In Women in the Workplace. If you want, we'd be happy to reach out to us so we can try and get you a copy of that. So Catherine had a question. Speaking of millennials.
Yeah, so I'm just curious, what are your thoughts on the first step in becoming a female leader or an advocate or someone who wants to be a part of this and break that glass ceiling, if you will, what is the first step in getting involved? I know, broad question.
I mean,
Read your book.
think about it. You mean in the tech world?
Absolutely.
Oh, okay. Well, I think recognize that there really is there is a sisterhood. There is a sisterhood, and that because there are so few women in the field right now, those who are there, those who've stayed for sure, they want to help each other, and we see that a lot. There's almost like this mandate, this code among a lot of the women that we met that they have a responsibility to each other to help pull each other up, push each other forward. Where I saw that really exemplified in a really dramatic way is I had the opportunity to attend the Grace Hopper Celebration of Women in Computing in Houston a couple of years ago, which is the largest gathering of female technologists in the world. And the year I went, they had 15,000 women. This year, there were 18,000.
That's great.
And every place you went, every panel, every session, everything, the whole message there was about helping each other. And the shine theory. Do you guys know what the shine theory is? When I shine, you shine.
Yeah,
So
love it.
women, successful women, surround themselves with other successful women. And this idea of, well, sharp elbows, there can only be one, the zero-sum game that might have existed in the past, at least among these women that we chronicled, and we interviewed close to 300 women for the book, there was a sense that, that's old school. New school is, let's help each other. And you're seeing it among, what I loved, again, back to some of the Grace Hopper, we met a number of college women there. And what was really striking about some of these programs that have been able to increase the numbers of women in computer science and engineering is that they have actually made, as part of their program, mentoring opportunities. So, for example, Carnegie Mellon, the women at computer science, the women at the School of Computer Science group, which is their main organization there, they actually run a mentoring program for kids in Pittsburgh where they bring them onto campus for 8 weeks. It's totally run by the students. And I had the chance to spend an evening with them, and what I loved about that was that not only were they paying it forward, and by the way, that was something that we saw at Stanford, at MIT, every campus that we visited where we were meeting, Columbia, where we were meeting young women in computer science, that was something they really believed in. But the other part about that was really cool is it created a bonding opportunity for them. So, right, the guys, go on the boondoggles, the ski trips, the golf. These women were volunteering together. So what happens? They have this meaningful experience volunteering in college. Well, guess what? They stay in touch. When someone goes off to get an internship at Google and an up-and-coming classmate wants intel on how do I finesse the interview, or what should I wear, or who should I talk to, or can you make a warm introduction? These women are helping each other. And I just thought that was really remarkable to see, and that's a big part of the story that we tell in the book.
I'm curious to know, how long did it take you to write the book?
A long time. I started working on it. I started curating interviews for the book in 2011. And my partner and I, who lives in San Francisco, we joined forces in 2013 to actually get the book proposal out, and then we sold it to St. Martin's in the fall of 2015. And then we, turned out the manuscript in about 9 months, which was a lot for this. But the thing is, this topic was really taking off. So, we were kind of riding the momentum from the Ellen Powell trial, and, we couldn't have predicted that 2017 was going to end up being this year of Uber and the Google Manifesto and all these VCs stepping down. We had no idea that was going to happen. But I do feel that the sort of tech feminist movement that we capture in this book is really a testament to the sisterhood and what allowed these women to feel comfortable coming forward now, particularly with the female founders naming names. I think that there's a sense that these women have each other's backs. And whereas a few years ago they may not have wanted to name names or come forward, there's always been a code where people would warn each other and give each other information. Like a sort of a secret handshake society kind of thing. There's all kinds of online secret stealth, online communities where these women connect with each other. But what we saw was this, and I think, the election had to do with it too. I think, if any of you attended the Women's March, I think this resurgence of feminism I think also really fueled this as well. But we really felt like what's happened this year, is a sign of this movement, and that these women they're not going quietly. They're going to continue, and thankfully they have a lot of male allies too,
Yeah.
who are standing up for them and believe that diversity and inclusion should be a priority in this field.
That's great. Well, guys, we're sort of at our time limit, but I think what would be really great is that maybe we have some connecting cocktails, as Ariane says so well. It's not networking. She taught me what it's connecting. And I really like that, actually. How can we all help each other out? How can we lift each other up? And we'd like very much to thank the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society for hosting us. Deb Barker, our executive director, Tanya, the headquarters team. I mean, this has really been like such a great opportunity. Be sure to do social media about us. And one quick thing we wanted to throw out is probably our next event will be again an International Women's Day event at the Roy Art Center. And then in June, we're probably going to do an event at Bryn Mawr Haverford Swarthmore around my reunion that we've done two at NYU. But we wanted to throw out something different to this audience. Like, we're thinking the next event, what we do is we have a panel, but we have one question, and then we set up tables, and then the panelists go out to the tables, so it can be more of an interactive session. We just kind of wanted to see what people think, so it's not like you're listening, you're actually having a time to dialogue, bring a problem. So let us know what you think of that idea. I've done that at NYU, and that was actually very successful. It's really created much more of an engaging audience, and just something different to kind of shake things up and keep it interesting. So don't forget, Cheryl's got her books for sale. Look for Heather's books. Make sure you find all these amazing women on the internet. We just can't thank you enough for all your great work, and what a diverse group of opinions and ideas, and celebrating everyone's success. So we hope that our group will continue to lift everyone up, and have a great night. Did I forget anything, Grace? Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.